So when I was a teenager, like in the early 1990s or somewhere around there, I remember reading in a magazine about this strange object that you could spin, and it would, by itself, it would slow down, stop, and spin in the opposite direction. And this to me sounded impossible. And in the magazine, there was no picture of this object. I think there was a way to order it with a credit card, but I didn't have a credit card at that time. And I just sort of forgot about it. And then something like 20 years later, I remembered having read about this thing. So I searched online, because now, 20 years later, I had access to the internet. And I found it. I found out that it's called a Rattleback. And you can order packs of them for a low price on various online shopping websites. So for the past few years, I have ordered packs of these things and given them away to children and colleagues, and tried to impress people with them. So let me show you what one of these things looks like. So here's a Rattleback made of plastic, and of course it's as you can see, it's a rigid body. There's no moving parts. There's no energy source. It's there's nothing flexible about it. It's got a flat side, so you can put it on the flat side. That's not so interesting, but it also has a round side. If you put it with the round face down, then you can spin it. And for example, we can spin it counterclockwise, and it'll spin quite happily that way. But if we try to spin it in the opposite direction, let's see what happens. It reverses by itself. Now, when I first read about this, it sounded impossible, because it seemed to me that it must somehow violate something like the law of conservation of angular momentum or something. And so the secret in what's going on has to do with the shape. It has to do with the shape of the round side of it. And we can understand a bit more what's going on if we push one end of this down and see what happens. So imagine you had a boat, and you pulled the front of the boat up onto the beach, and you pushed the front of the boat down to the sand, and then you let go. You could expect that the boat would rock up and down, right? And this thing does rock up and down, but as it bounces, it prefers to spin one particular direction. And you might think, well, that could be explained maybe if the bottom of the boat is not symmetrical. And indeed, if we look at the bottom here, it's not symmetrical. It's skewed to one side. And so my thinking initially was that on this half of the Rattleback, maybe it's skewed in one direction to prefer rotation in a particular direction, and maybe on the other half it's skewed the opposite way, so that both ends sort of prefer to rotate the same way. Now that turns out to not be the shape, as far as I can tell. It looks like it's skewed one way here, and if we turn it around, it looks like it's not skewed the opposite way. It looks like it's sort of lopsided. It doesn't have rotational symmetry. So I don't completely understand what's going on here, but maybe you can think about this yourself, or maybe even buy one online, and you can maybe figure out better than I did what's going on. There's a version that I read about online that has little turtles on each end, and they can be rotated, and by rotating the turtles, you can change the direction in which the object prefers to spin. I also read online about a Rattleback, a particular type of Rattleback, that will reverse no matter which way you spin it. So if you spin it clockwise, it'll reverse to counterclockwise, and if you spin it counterclockwise, it reverses to clockwise. And I don't understand how that could possibly be the case, but maybe it's possible. And there's also academic articles on these things. You can search for physics papers. If you search on Google Scholar, for example, for the keyword Rattleback and physics, or Rattleback and chaos, or dynamics, or things like this, you can find papers that analyze these things.